in with some sort of footnote or reference to it will be developed.
Well, is it going to be our place, this committee's place to develop these standards?
That was my question. Yeah.
So that's what we're working through right now with the implementation committee, is how does this move going forward? Because these issues touch so many different committees, it's kind of impossible to have 3 different committees working on setting all of these standards at the same time.
Right.
So moving forward with one accountability committee, which is likely going to be the implementation committee plus some community members from each work group.
Okay,
and that group would work through these and set these policies and work with staff on what they look like and present them to city council and planning commission for approval or editing. And then part of what we're still working on how this moves forward in that phase is, then do those come back to this greater housing group, or is this group kind of wrap up its work and move on? So that's where we're looking to get some input from you guys as far as, do you want this particular group to have a role going forward? Or are you content with, we've sent our recommendations to council and we will have representation on the accountability committee, and then that group is taking this forward?
Well, I think my issue with that has been highlighted because you're right, there is so much overlap that it's like, well, who's on first?
Mm-hmm.
And if there is a role, I mean, obviously, I shouldn't say this all the time, obviously, but housing is a primary concern of a lot of age groups across our community, whether it's affordability, workforce housing, simple availability, turnover, rental housing agreements. Housing is a huge concern. So I'm not sure that just disbanding is going to sit real well, but we would need a charge that doesn't necessarily overlap with land use. And so maybe this is one of the ways we can do that.
We can definitely look at that. I think the other part that does not overlap with land use is the neighborhood planning effort that you guys put a lot of time into discussing and putting recommendations into.
There is, and there will be good chances to do that, I think, with the sesquicentennial that Elaine got me involved in. It's all her fault. But that's a really great opportunity to highlight our neighborhoods. So yes, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm all for it.
Okay.
So do we want this group to even think about recommendations for those things as they're developed? Do we want any input from this particular housing group?
I just feel like that we don't need to have groups out there coming up with various recommendations. I think that's spinning our wheels. And if there are things that are related to us, such as maybe or was it the rental piece or whatever, maybe so, but I just feel like that, you're going to have, if you have 24 people overall looking at this, and then you come together, you'll have, no telling what you'll have as far as trying to then congest it down or digest it down to a workable document or a workable result. And I guess it was one thing, Shannon, that I'm not certain about is I know, or I thought I knew we were going to do the PDs with no acreage, but I also thought that there were going to be just some minimal guidelines, such as the 35 feet, such as the occupancy of the commercial section or piece, and also as far as a little bit of a definition on the residential piece, having a bathroom that opened into the common area. I guess I wonder where those are going to be.
So I think we're still determining that if those are going to be set by catalyst area or if those are going to be set by overlay districts. But I have heard those.
So what happens if the guy from the Wells Fargo Bank comes forward with a PD, which I mean, he has described as it being a commercial with a restaurant and maybe 2 housing units on the 3rd floor. But we haven't really put any definition around that, such as the bathroom to the common area and such as, the limits or time limits until he can have an occupant in the commercial area. I guess we are kind of sort of by eliminating the acreage. Yeah, that's a good thing. But by just leaving it to be wide open, are we not really sort of setting ourselves up for a problem here? I know it's not going to get discussed tonight though, because it's not on the agenda.
Right, but you guys can make recommendations. I think Planning Commission is going to pick this back up, right, Elaine? And so you can make some
Yes.
amendments to that if you want to add those.
Well, I think that Bob, I guess that's why I'm wondering if there's not more to come out of maybe Wednesday's implementation meeting, because Bob and I have talked about what I just kind of went over. So I guess I'm wondering when that's going to get interjected. Because we've got y'all are supposed to, isn't the Planning Commission supposed to meet again on the 29th?
Yes,
Okay.
but
I
we
think
only have two items on our agenda. So we
is it-
won't be discussing anything else, 2 action items.
this won't be there. This is not on the agenda for the 29th.
This ordinance is,
Okay.
and the other one is, I'm sorry, I can't think of it right now.
Well, Shannon, then I think it's on either, Catherine and I tonight to say something privately to Bob before the meeting starts, or it come up on Wednesday during y'all's meeting.
So it's on the agenda for both meetings on Wednesday, the Implementation Committee and the Land Use Committee meeting.
Okay, well then I think that's the time that y'all can resolve that. I think that I don't think it was like we were going to have half a dozen or so pieces to it, but I think those several things that I just mentioned, I thought were intended to be part of it. So there would be at least some definition during this 6 to 9 month period that remains while we finalize Clemson, getting the final version out there for ClemsonNext to include the charrette and everything else.
Well, one of the things that I know is going to come up is this idea of, do you want to do it as a 35-foot height? Do you want to do it as 3 floors? What's your input on that?
Well, I mean, I think it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. At 35 feet or 3 stories, I think you're going to find it's going to be the same, roughly.
Okay.
I mean,
Well,
but yeah.
but would it, it depends on the type of business you're putting in, if you have a fairly high ceiling and something like that, would you then be able to put 2 additional floors on top of it?
Well, what you might want to say is 3 floors or 35 feet, whichever is the greater or whichever is the lesser, however you want to do it. So you can kind of almost have them together. Or 3 stories not to exceed 35 feet. Because you're right. I mean, if you're doing a commercial space, it's going to have a 10-foot ceiling at least. And then it's also probably going to have, your space between the floors for your, all your mechanical stuff. So 3, that's 30. That would be 3 floors of 10 feet. I don't know if that would even go. Yeah, it might work at 35 feet.
Okay, so to make progress on this, I think the question, to me, it seems like the 35 feet or 3 floors is somewhat questionable. But yeah, I think we need to consider those boundaries. I mean, that's something that, again, our committee can do, is set some sort of roadmap for what we're looking for housing.
Well, if you go ahead, John.
But again, I think that you got 2 groups meeting on Wednesday. I think before we spend a whole lot of time trying to come up with recommendations, I think they need to run with it and we can just see where it is.
Okay.
So
Do
we're
you guys
still
have
planning-
anything you want me to take to them as concerns besides the height and the defining purpose-built student housing as where the bathroom is opening to the residents?
Yeah, we have to define that better. I think Elaine and I've talked about that, is the stuff that got tossed in or tossed out, I'm not sure where it is now, about it just being an extra room is not sufficient.
No, bathroom has to have a bathroom.
No, one of the things it said was a room that was a bedroom or a room that was not
That
attached. to
didn't,
the room.
that did not have a bathroom, yeah. And my question is, if you could do, my concern is you could do 3 or 4 bedrooms with their own private bath and locking like we have in those now, and add another room to meet that, and it might be an 8x10 room or whatever, but then it could be sold as, here's a study area in the student housing apartment building. So that's why I didn't like the idea of just saying it could be another room without a bathroom.
Okay, do you guys have anything else you want to add on this strategic plan ordinance? And then I can bring up the document that has a lot of different purpose-built student housing definitions on it, if you like.
No, I'm good with this.
Well, I mean, I guess is that our role on that?
Well, I think if it's something that you want input on, you can provide your input today, and I can take that as a starting point to the land use group and the implementation committee on Wednesday when they look at this too. Maybe that's the way this functions, is you kind of start with some groundwork that then I take to them, and it's a back and forth.
I think it is our role in the notion that at some point, some of these buildings may not be for students because the student population may or may not be there. In other words, we don't want to build buildings that are only for just students.
Oh, I agree completely with that, Bill. I mean, I think that's why the definition with the conforming, well, not conforming, but I mean, where you had bedroom, bathroom, that continued combination. I think that's why going with the bathroom that opened into the common area was in an effort to try to quit having that. So, and I mean, the other way to do that too is to define typically the common space. I guess it's not common, but maybe it is called a common space is smaller than, the other, there needs to be almost a ratio of what the common space is to the bedroom space, so that it's not, the minimal size.
Right.
If that makes sense.
And storage, because the students don't bring a lot of stuff with them. They don't need very big closets, and they don't need extra storage space, where a family would need more than that. So I saw some language somewhere about that, about having X number of square feet of closet space per bedroom, and then X number of square feet of additional storage space. So I like that. I like making sure we have that in there too. That's gonna help make it a more versatile space, more versatile living space, apartment or whatever.
And ask Eden and Sam, do you guys have anything you want to contribute? Okay.
No, I'm good. I've agreed with everything John's saying, if it's any consolation.
Okay. Okay. Elaine and Catherine, you guys want me to bring up that purpose-built student housing document?
Yeah,
Sure.
great. For everybody who hasn't seen it, I hope you've seen the piece last week in the Greenville News about the impact fees in Easley.
That's it.
Let me send it to you.
But it got sent, but I couldn't open it because I don't have a subscription to the Greenville News.
We have a city subscription, it turned out, so I will send that to you guys.
So this document, so I've started to pull together everything that I've heard from the various ClemsonNext committees, but also going out and seeing how other university communities have defined purpose-built student housing. So one of the things that I've come across working with staff is that it's not legal for us to tell them how they can lease them. So one like this first one where it says each student is under an independent lease with the landlord to rent on a per bedroom basis, that wouldn't necessarily fly. I think this is part of what we were discussing earlier, that purpose-built student housing, each bedroom must have a bathroom only accessible by the bedroom, that no bathrooms are accessible except via a bedroom, and all bedrooms open to the same single common area. So that's, you're kind of defining that's what it is. And some of the other cities that I've looked at, they talk about how they are communities designed for residents in higher education or for adults in higher education. And they talk about the amenity list that those developments also have. So although we can't necessarily define the leasing arrangement, you could define it by maybe some of the amenities that are commonly offered.
Does anybody know how that kind of leasing where you lease by the bedroom, how that impacts or is related to the Fair Housing Act? That just seems like that's making it very specific for students. And that's why I like the idea of saying that about the way, including that in the way it's defined. But that just seems like I just remember the article about the lady in San Marcos, Texas, when about the college that ate the city or whatever, and they were talking about the rental by the bedroom like that, and how it closed out families, like a single mom with 2 children would have to be renting by the bedroom instead of by the apartment, and how it drove the cost of that rental up for her. So I don't know if anybody's ever taken a look at that or not.
Hang on, I'm just looking. Because I agree with you. Oh, yeah, let's see. Most of it, interestingly, goes about students being discriminated against.
Hmm.
Yeah, I know. I said interestingly enough. I'll see what I can find, because there's several things here about student housing and the Fair Housing Act. What I'm seeing is usually the other way around. Y'all go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So I pulled in some things from Baltimore down here. They had a very specific definition of purpose-built student housing. So that it's a building that's designed and marketed to be used for the primary purpose of housing students, undergraduate and graduate, residents, counselors, or advisors. It's not located on the campus of a specific institution. It's privately owned or owned by the institution. That it consists of 3 or more units. Like I said, we can't add the renting by a per bed basis. Theirs has that the development has a management plan that addresses security, parking, transportation, and code of conduct.
Oh, I like that one.
Which is nice, but we'd have to figure out how to require that and oversee that.
Well, because Robert and I talked about that at some point, not all of that, but we talked about the transportation, because I thought that was something maybe the city had, I wouldn't say mandated, but I guess that's probably what I said to Robert at the time. And he said, no, that actually it was an amenity that the complexes were offering. But I think that there's something to that transit may be discussing too, because that would keep more cars off the road. I mean,
that's part of what the reduced parking was intended to do. But I think if you are going to have reduced parking like that, which Earl Street has, I'm trying to think which ones have. John, you might can remember, but with the reduced parking, then requiring a bus stop that would be on a transit line before they could build something with 600 beds that didn't have but 250 parking spaces or whatever.
because I mean,
Actually, the campus, the first one, Campus View, only has about 50% parking. And then I think Earl Finley doesn't have 100%, but it's not 50%. And then I think the youth center is probably closer to 100. I think the one thing we lost sight of with the parking reduction, that whole conversation, there was a lot of noise out there that people were afraid they would bring cars and be parked all throughout the neighborhoods, and that just hasn't come to happen. So, I mean, I think that was, we might have been ill advised in that situation.
So what's the deal? Do they pay more or a fee if they want to bring their car?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, they do, yes.
It's like buying a parking spot or renting a parking spot.
Right.
But they only provide so many per apartment, right? It might, or is it 0.6 or 0.5 or whatever per bedroom, something like that.
In Campus View, it's a 50%. So that's that. I know that. And then, but again, I think it was Catherine. If you bring a car or you get a space, you're paying for it. It ain't free. So I don't know what the fee is, but it's so much per month. But again, I think that we might could have used that to our advantage. And I still think about the Oral Finley building. I mean, that garage is awful. And maybe had we gone with some kind of parking reduction, maybe that garage wouldn't have been quite as awful. It would have still been awful, but maybe only to a lesser degree.
Slightly less awful.
Yeah.
So to go back to your question about the transportation, Catherine and John, the traffic committee and the land use committee both have recommendations going forward that say future development of purpose-built student housing or multifamily housing needs to either be on an existing transit line or needs to, I can't think of the exact language right now at the moment, or they need to have a plan in place to work with CAT and our transportation systems to put that into place.
Exactly.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair.
I mean, that, for traffic and transit, Elaine knows how much I don't like bargaining with developers, but if they were really willing to help address the traffic and transit problem, that is probably where I would be willing to bargain a little bit.
Well, but let's don't get too excited about that, because I can tell you right now, Dockside would have liked to have had a parking reduction approval there, but he would have only added more bedrooms. So that's why if you're going to go down that path, then you'd also need to go down the density path so that we don't have an exchange here in any form or fashion. That's one of the things I'm afraid of in some groups within not in our organization, but some groups within the city, that, they feel like this is a negotiation. So for example, on the parking reduction, well, if you give me parking reduction, then I can add another 100 beds or whatever, which is no, you can't or shouldn't. And then the other one was, again, if we do so many units that are affordable or workforce housing within a complex, and I can add more beds. And no, I mean, neither one of those things, we can't allow ourselves to get caught in that. And that's why we need to define density, whether it be by the acre or however you want to do it, so that you just put a stop to that completely.
Oh, I agree. I agree completely, John. I don't want to give away anything. We're the prettiest girl at the prom. We're not giving it up for nothing.
But the other thing about it is, and I know it's not part of this conversation, but I know it is on our old business, but whether it's the Charleston program or whatever, we need to implement something so that in the event they don't build student housing, workforce and or affordable within their units or within their structures, then they're going to pay, you can call it a fine or whatever you want to call it, but X dollars per square foot on the unit. So if the unit's however big it is, they're going to pay $5-10 a square foot not to do that, and they don't get any kind of special treatment other than that.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay.
Can you explain what those zones are right there? Zones except the following DR?
So those are their, I don't want to say they are their overlay zones, but they're basically their zoning. It's just like our RM20, R20, R12.
So it's from somewhere else.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I thought you were referring to ours, and I didn't know what.
Nope. This is just that I copied from Baltimore because I like that it had a lot of things we hadn't discussed yet.
Okay,
So
thanks.
they do say that purpose-built student housing, they say where it's permitted and where it's not permitted.
Yeah, because they have a similar issue where Johns Hopkins is. If you've ever been down there, it's fascinating. Hopkins has had to buy a lot of the land around the community, and Loyola and Notre Dame are right there together. And they've had a lot of challenges, just like Charleston has with the medical university and the college.
So then they also have some other additional regulations that each development is reviewed by, I guess, their version, the design review panel for context within the community in which it is proposed. All the regulations for them apply to both newly constructed units and buildings that are being renovated. And again, that all of the buildings have a transit stop and contain storage for other modes of transportation, such as bicycles and scooters.
I love that. We've got to do something about our transit stops.
Right. The ones that are crossed out because when I talked with staff about them, they said they weren't legal, but they do address what, see if I can take the crossouts off. They
So
address.
can I ask you while you do that, can I ask you, is that the staff's recommendation, or did they consult legal advice before they say they're not legal?
I think this just came from staff, so we could take this to Mary. These
I think
ideas
we
to
need to
Mary.
question that. Yeah, I think we need to
Okay.
question what's really legal and what's not. It might, because it could be interpreted differently by someone who's not like
I
me,
think
a
what
legal
I need is
profession.
like more exact language to take to her, because it is so dependent on the exact language you use. So if you
Right.
wanted me to take some of this exact language from Baltimore to her and say, would this be legal here? I can do that.
Okay.
So basically,
Well, essentially, number 5, even though it's not for affordable, families, but it does say that shall be provided at a below market rate for students receiving a Pell Grant or other need-based financial assistance. So essentially, that's stating you can't have a quote unquote affordable units. You see that, number 5?
right.
So I question whether that's actually illegal. So we'll see, but I think maybe giving it unmarked to somebody like Mary.
But I have a list, so I will add it to my list, and I will get feedback for you guys from her.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
And even if it's not legal now, that doesn't mean we couldn't petition and it would be legal in a year.
That's true.
'Cause we are not the only community dealing with this.
Right. So the other thing is the idea of a management plan. If you guys were interested in that, that's something we could, we'd have to add, just like with the definition of purpose-built student housing and expanding the rental housing policy, we'd have to add what that management plan is and how it's reviewed and looked at, but that each of these complexes would have a management plan about how they're going to manage their transportation, their different amenities, have a code of conduct for the students that live there. That's something some other communities have done.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And Baltimore is fascinating. Absolutely is fascinating.
I think that's kind of it from where we are right there. So if I'm understanding you guys correctly, I will take some of these things that we just talked about, and I will talk to Mary and see with this wording, or is there wording that we could use that it would be legal, or where do we stand right now with this as far as leasing by the bed, a management plan, and allowing for affordable housing.
One other thing that I'd like to see us figure out if we can do, and I'm pretty sure that the university has a code of conduct for on-campus housing that they have said, I believe, if I'm correct, that it applies to off-campus living as well. And I think it'd be worth making sure that's the case, and if not, recommending that. So whatever's not allowed in on-campus housing would not be allowed in off-campus housing, or it would be counted as a violation for the students.
I'll find that out.
Okay.
Didn't we have a discussion at some point? I know we've had so many about when you move into an off-campus, when you move into an apartment complex, that you would get some kind of information that was a flyer or something. Was that about code of conduct? Do anybody remember? Am I making?
There's an off-campus housing guide that
Oh,
I think Crossy worked with that a couple of
Okay.
years ago to get that done, and they worked with the university, and it's handed out. We talked about, and Catherine, we talked about having like a cheat sheet of what those guidelines or requirements or whatever were that would be included. Every rental house has to have an occupancy sheet or in some format attached to the door, so that the city has approved this particular property may have 2 unrelated people, or this one may have 3, and that's identified there. So if the residents go in there and they have 3 or 4 unrelated people, they are breaking our regulations. So I didn't wondered if we couldn't make sure that that gets distributed to those residents as well, so that we had a way to ensure that they knew what was required behavior wise, and, you know, trash in the yard and all the things that are required.
I will add that. That seems like something we could add to the rental housing policy.
Yeah, it was just making sure of the best way to get it to people these days, but you know, and it is a good way, Elaine, with the other stuff we're talking about, it's a good way to capture their information.
Right.
Well, this is my view on the rental housing policy. And again, I think Catherine said part of it. You know, there's always this discussion of how many beds, student beds or beds we have in Clemson that are rental. Because we never get that number right. So I think that should be something that everybody has to do every year. And I'm including all the bid units and everybody. So that way we have an idea. But I think there's also something too, and y'all can laugh if you want to. I think we ought to charge. I know right now, is there a fee with that now we collect?
For rental
Yes.
housing?
But right
Yeah,
now,
like-
it just applies to rental housing that exists in residential neighborhoods.
Okay, so here's the deal. You could, you know, I know if we started going to the youth center and all those and talked about it, they'd be Grayson Kane with us. So what you do is you go to them and say, as a part of the process, you're going to pay a $10 fee, or you're going to pay a $25 fee annually, which is not a big number. They're going to pass it on to the renter anyway. Number one, it helps us identify the numbers of people. But now Shannon, you may know this. I've heard somebody say there's 17,000 rental beds in Clemson. Is that
Yeah.
true? Is that true?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. You said yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, there's 17,000 rental beds in Clemson. If we collected $10 per bed, that's $170,000 annually we pick up there. And $10 a bed is nominal. If you collected $25 a bed, which is still a nominal amount, you know how much that is? That's $425,000 that we would end up bringing in. That $425,000 is exactly the amount of money that the Green Crescent Trail needs every year to get their grants from Prisma and all that crowd. So it would fund that in its entirety. Or number two, you know, the $425,000 or even the $170,000 would go a long way on the Shaw Center for what we're trying to do. So I think, again, it's something, there are 2 things that come out of that. Number one, it gives us a true audit of how many beds we got. So we no longer going to have these speculative numbers being kicked around. And then number 2, I think it's a way to fund the Shaw Center or to fund the Green Crescent Trail, because I mean, truthfully, the students are going to be, you know, and I think you'll find the students are going to be users of the Green Crescent Trail. So let's let them help us fund it. Or for that, you know, like I say, just 2 options there. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out.
And that's a per bed fee, right? A
Yep,
Per bed,
per bed.
per bed fee.
But again, it's the $10 or even $25 per bed. They're going to pass it on to the renter. It's not like it's going to kill them.
So that's included in the recommendations that are going before council tonight for discussion, and will hopefully be ratified at the July 6th meeting. And so if that happens and those are ratified, we can move forward with coming up with some different plans of how to make that work and what the fee structures would be, and how to hire the additional staff that we would need to conduct those inspections and things like that if we add the rest of the developments to the rental housing program.
So where is that on the agenda tonight?
It
Well,
is under the discussion items, I believe.
Yeah, it's whether we get into these specifics or not, I don't know. I'm going to be prepared. Let's put it that way. But yeah, it is in the discussion items.
Okay.
So I think, I mean, my gut is let's wait till July 6th ratified, and then we can start really putting numbers and policy together. Let's just make sure we're all headed in the right direction and on the same page first.
That sounds like a plan.
All right, guys, that pretty much covered the topics we were going to cover tonight. Do you guys want to meet next week? And if so, what would you like to dig in on?
Well, I guess what I'd like to know is kind of, yeah, at some point, what is our charge? We've battered around these ideas of where there's overlap. I mean, I'm not sure where we're going to be on that, but if you think that here's my point. I would like to meet and make a difference. If we're just going to meet and bat around some ideas and not have anything to do, then let's not. So I don't want to waste anybody's time.
So I'd like to, let's think about this, because one of the things we talked about was neighborhood development, neighborhood planning. Okay. So one of the things, Catherine and I are kind of spearheading plans for a sesquicentennial celebration for Clemson next year. The 1872 was when the settlement of Calhoun was recognized, and it was that settlement that then evolved into the town of Calhoun and was changed to the town of Clemson. And so Robert had sent something earlier to Catherine and I about getting groups of neighborhoods involved with that. So if maybe we could look at the city map and think about where we might create some of these neighborhood groups that would, first of all, I think it would help in neighborhood planning in general. So if you go by what's on Nextdoor right now, anybody can set up a neighborhood on Nextdoor, and you can set what your boundaries are. And there are some neighborhoods that only have, half a dozen residents. And in fact, there's one called Clemson that I haven't figured out where that neighborhood is, because we're all Clemson, but they chose to set some boundaries and label it as Clemson. We're Clemson Historic West End and east of College, and those together make up Downtown Neighborhood Association, the DNA. But they're probably 30 to 40, I've forgotten the number now, individual neighborhoods registered on Nextdoor. And I think we probably need to think about how we could combine some of those and create, for lack of a better word, neighborhood zones. And that could help us with some of this neighborhood planning and also getting the neighborhoods involved with this event for next year. And I'd like to ask Eden if she'd be willing to work with us on our planning commission. Our planning committee, Catherine, as we start to move forward with that. That would bring us a student voice, graduate student, right, Eden? You're a graduate student, but she's got experience in working with the Clemson neighborhoods because of her role in Ken Robinson's class. So I think she could be valuable to us.
And I think we could pay you something, Eden. We're not asking you to do it for free.
Really?
You got deep pockets?
Okay.
I got connections.
Yeah.
Well, let me just say, Eden volunteered to help us, not to get paid, but yeah, it would be nice if we could. But I think she has an interest in that. That's why she's here.
So yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm keeping an eye on the thunderstorm that's coming. That's all.
Okay. So is that something we need to meet next week to do, or you want to hold off a little bit to see where council goes with everything?
What's the agenda this week, Shannon? Because I can't ever go to the next meetings. You guys are the ones Wednesday mornings who can go.
You're muted, Shannon.
Thank you.
I have the two agendas here for those meetings.
Thank you. The agenda for next week or for this week is to talk about the strategic plan ordinance and then to circle back around to this idea of how are we moving forward? Is it with one accountability committee, or are there certain areas that need more of a task force approach? So for example, the traffic group has talked about their whole community group maybe doesn't need to continue to meet, but they putting together like a task force of people that have expertise in that area. So for them, it would be somebody from CatBus, it would be the city engineer. It'd probably be somebody from Green Crescent Trail, somebody from the university with expertise in traffic planning, like a Wayne Sarasua. So a much smaller committee, like a 5-person committee that can actually look at this, figure out how to fund what they want to do and come up with like a whole calendar and schedule of how you fund what and when and where and what other policies need to be made. Because at the next level of creating those policies and trying to figure out how to fund them, that just requires, I mean, for traffic, more expertise than we had in the room for that work group. So for housing, maybe it's a similar road forward. And maybe this group's job is identify who needs to be on that task force, or maybe because it's a different topic, it does stay community member oriented. I am happy to take your input on that to the implementation committee on Wednesday.
I don't see the big committee getting as involved with this neighborhood planning, that kind of thing that this group has brought forward as our invest in neighborhood preservation enhancement in key areas. So that may be something that this committee can, at least for the short term, continue to focus on, because we really haven't yet. We've been focused on the other things more.
No, I think you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, I have one idea related to neighborhood planning that I can share at a future meeting. It doesn't matter to me when we meet, but I'm interested in continuing to meet about neighborhood planning. And I think it's important that we continue to have neighbors, especially representatives from Black neighborhoods in the committee to listen and to express their points of view. So I'm not invested in necessarily being on the committee if we need to reduce numbers, but I do think that we should have our Black residents heard as we plan neighborhoods.
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking that this weekend at Juneteenth, that it certainly highlighted the fact that we have not paid attention to the road maintenance, expansion, sidewalks, or overall quality of roads in that neighborhood back there.
Bill, you unmuted and muted yourself back. Do you have comments?
My only comment is I agree with what Sam said, that needs to happen. My worry is that as I listen to this discussion, as I listen to other discussions, though it comes up because the elephant in the room is student housing. A lot of the discussion we've had here is on student-centered housing. I just, whatever happens down the road, and it doesn't have to be me, and it doesn't have to be anybody on this committee, but I hope that every time there's a discussion of anything that has to do with housing, people will keep on talking about affordable housing. It's an intractable problem, but it needs to be talked about.
So it sounds like maybe I'll take this idea to the committee on Wednesday of the housing group staying together, but refocusing on the neighborhood planning and preservation and affordable housing so that there's not as much overlap.
Yes, I think that's just it. We hopefully, if we have enough recommendations, I mean, even if we're just coming up with some boundaries, as you said, to get the ball rolling, that's a good thing.
Okay.
Okay, campers, I've got to run. I've got Pendleton Historic Foundation meeting in 20 minutes. So anything else for the good of the order?
I've got one quick thing. The other groups are actually talking about bringing in speakers and presenters from other cities, other towns, people that have focused on the issues or dealt with the issues or are experts in the issues that they're facing. So if you guys want to put some thought into, is there somebody you'd like to hear from?
Yeah,
Let me know.
I've been talking to two people. I was just trying to find her name. I've been talking to two people. One person I've been talking to is, I'm going to say her name incorrectly. So Dante Sardinis. I'm going to screw that up. But she is with the Arthur Blank Family Foundation in Atlanta, and they've talked a lot about how they have developed the West Side. I actually have given counsel that book called Good Company. She is willing to have a small panel to talk to us about what they did in their Black neighborhood around Atlanta. And then the other person whose name I was just trying to find when you said that is the person who's at the Charleston Housing Authority, who has been behind a lot of this movement for affordable housing with the impact fees. So I can certainly find a time and see if we can arrange their discussions. Ow.
That would be great. And everybody else put some thought into it. If anything comes up or you're reading something, let me know and we'll see what we can do to kind of expand kind of what we're working from.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to have some guest speakers that could even be scheduled to talk. I mean, it'd be a public meeting. We could even do that and open it up to people. So I think that would be great.
That'd be great.
Awesome, guys. I gotta run.
All right.
Have a good
Bye,
evening.
guys.
Thanks.
Sam, it's good to see you.